H.R.
Madam Chair, I'd request to
4863.
dispense with the reading.
Without objection, the amendment will be considered as read. The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes in support of the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm excited to give everybody another shot at the apple here. As we all know, China has used its economic clout to pressure foreign countries to adopt behavior contrary to our national interests. What is shocking is how this nefarious influence has now reached our shores. Since 2001, when China entered the WTO, we have been sold the idea that as American families and businesses import cheap Chinese goods, that we will do so while simultaneously exporting our American commitment to universal human dignity and the values that have inspired this nation and the world since our founding. 18 years later, we know that nothing could be further from the truth. In my community of Northeast Ohio, this broken promise had led to, yes, cheaper televisions and consumer goods, but also the decimation of our manufacturing sector from which we still have not recovered. We were told China would obey the rules that they signed up for, and instead we have found rampant cheating across every sector of the economy. At the same time, one American company after another has made the short-sighted trade of relinquishing their commitment to free speech for themselves and their employees for access to the world's largest consumer market. As our economies become more entangled, this economic connection has the potential to fundamentally undermine the American way of life and the liberties that define our nation. Earlier this month, the general manager of the Houston Rockets tweeted out, "Fight for freedom, stand with Hong Kong." Although this tweet was deleted, the Chinese Basketball Association promptly announced cooperation with the Rockets had been terminated. The commissioner of the NBA, Adam Silver, went on to say that China pressured him to fire the Rockets general manager, a request that Silver refused. In response, China's state-run broadcaster CCTV announced last Friday that Silva would face, quote, retribution sooner or later. As for China's campaign against the NBA, it has had real consequences. And remember, this is all over a tweet by a U.S. citizen. As Commissioner Silver said this month, quote, "I don't know where we go from here. The financial consequences have been and may continue to be fairly dramatic." The NBA isn't an isolated episode. China has also exerted its pressure on Hollywood to change storylines or the depiction of characters in films that seek to have a chance in Chinese movie theaters. And last year, China demanded that 44 airlines stop referring to Taiwan as a non-Chinese territory, a request that the White House rightfully dismissed as, quote, Orwellian nonsense. Nonetheless, China's state-run People's Daily reported that the airlines had complied, including certain U.S. carriers. Chinese bullying of American companies' policies is a threat we're going to be facing for a long time to come. But the most immediate challenge is ensuring that this bullying doesn't lead to basic infringement on America's right to free speech. All my amendment does is require exporters receiving XM assistance to certify that they do not punish their employees for private communications on issues that China is so sensitive to, specifically freedom in Hong Kong and human rights in Xinjiang and Tibet. Nothing in this amendment affects a company's policies in the workplace or its ability to manage business communications. But when employees are expressing themselves on their own time, and if they want to stand by victims of oppression, an XM beneficiary can't retaliate against them. As I said at the outset, this is a bipartisan opportunity. While I don't often agree with the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, she has shown strong leadership on this issue by signing on to no fewer than 3 letters with Republican colleagues denouncing China's bullying. I would ask for unanimous consent that Ms. Ocasio-Cortez's letters be entered into the record, including a letter to the NBA, to Activision Blizzard, and to Apple.
Without objection, such is the order.
Thank you. As the gentlelady from New York and her colleagues wrote in the October 18th letter to Apple, the Chinese government is growing more aggressive in its attempts to dictate terms to U.S. corporations, as last week's headlines involving Apple, the National Basketball Association, and Activision made clear. Cases like these raise real concern about whether Apple and other large corporate entities will bow to growing Chinese demands rather than lose access to more than 1 billion Chinese consumers. In promoting value, as in the most things, actions matter far more than words. In her October 9th letter, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez concluded, unless American businesses aggressively confront this intimidation campaign, the Chinese government will increasingly punish free speech outside China's borders. The most common method is to threaten access to the growing Chinese domestic market for any international company or organization that criticizes or allows its employees to criticize. Chinese government policies, if not resisted, this result could in American and multinational companies making employment conditional on silence regarding topics deemed sensitive by the Chinese Communist Party. I agree with everything that was just said, Madam Chair. If China can use its economic influence to reach into our private lives and silence U.S. workers, the future will look very dark indeed. This is a bipartisan priority, and I therefore urge bipartisan support of my amendment. I yield back.
And with the gentleman yield.
Yes.
I appreciate my colleague from Ohio's incisive amendment. It speaks to something that is to the moment and important, especially in light of the Facebook hearing we had last week and the questions we had for that company about free speech rights. And with that, I yield back and urge adoption.